So I've had a ton of requests for a multi-tier planter out of fence pickets. So this is what I came up with. So in this video, I will be teaching you step by step on how to make this multi-tier planter, which is essentially 4 planter boxes built into one. I have a lot to cover in this video, so let's go ahead and dive into it.
Okay, so to start with, I'm going to cut all of my parts from my frame. And all of the frame parts are actually going to be a 1.5 by 1.5. And you can get this in a couple of different ways. You can actually split down a 2x4, which is what I prefer, or you can buy 2x2s, which are actually 1.5 by 1.5. And as always, the cut list will be in the description, as well as a link to my Etsy shop if you are a plans in the hand type of person. So now that I have all of my parts A through I pre-cut, let's go ahead and start assembling our base. For the entire frame of this build, I'm going to be using pocket hole joinery. So I'm going to head over to the 720 Pro and I'm going to put pocket holes in the ends of parts B, C, and H. So to start this base assembly, I'm going to take my 2 boards G, the outer boards that do not have pocket holes, and I'm going to place my H boards in between. Then I'm going to measure down 14 inches and make a mark. This is where the outside edge of the center board will actually line up. This may look a little odd at first because what I'm calling the center board is actually 3/4 of an inch off center. This base may seem a little complicated at first, but it's not. So I'll walk you through every step of it, and just know that once the base is built, the rest is pie. And now I'm just throwing in some 2.5 inch pocket hole screws, and if you'd like to add some exterior wood glue to this, go for it. But the most important step is, once that's installed, you have to shake it like a crazy person and spin it around, and I really have no clue why I'm doing all this. And so now I've turned the frame to where the largest opening is away from me, and we're going to install parts B and C. So starting with part C, I'm going to measure 14 inches from the outside edge to the inside of this board and make a mark. And then I'll just repeat this step for part B and install the parts. Now you will hear these part labels again later on, like B and C. That just means that there are multiple parts in this frame that are the same length. And like I said, once this is done, you're past the hardest part of the whole build. So something that I've noticed just from posting these different styles of build videos, the videos where the build actually looks easy to build, they do great. But if it's a larger build that may look complicated, they don't do as well. So just by looking at a thumbnail, people are deciding, they're telling themselves that they cannot build something. They don't even give it a chance to see how easy that it actually is to build. And that's a perfect example of how we are our worst enemies when it comes to this type of thing. So always look at a new project with an "I've got this" attitude, because if you don't, you're doomed from the beginning. Okay, so with our main frame assembled, let's go ahead and start installing our uprights. So what I'm trying to say with that little hand signal is, place your pocket holes facing out. That way they're easier to get to a little further down the line. And the 4 uprights that I'm installing now are all parts E. And so all that I'm doing is lining these up with the 4 corners of our base. And since that was our tallest tier, I'm going to put it in the back, kind of in this diamond shape, the way that the end result will be. And now I'm just installing uprights D. Again, just lining them up with the boards on our base. And the final upright is part F, and this will be the only one where I'll offset the pocket holes so that they do not overlap. And this is what it should look like at this point. And you can already start to see where this whole project is heading. Next, I'm going to be using 2 parts A with no pocket holes and 4 parts B with pocket holes on each end. The 2 parts A I'm just going to attach to the back tier with the pocket holes that we've already drilled in the uprights. And then on the inside of the frame, I'm going to attach 2 of the part B, 3 1/4 of an inch from the top of part A to the top of part B. And these are going to be what I call nailer boards. And I call them that for a reason. We're actually going to be using these to install our walls. So anytime I call something a nailer board, and it looks like that it's 3/4 of an inch higher than the rest of the material, well, it's because that it is. If all of the parts were flush, we wouldn't have anything to nail to. So once the 2 nailer boards B are installed, we'll use 2 more parts B to finish off our back tier. And now let's move to our middle tier. And for this, I want 4 parts A with a pocket hole only in one end. And then I'm going to use 2 parts B with pocket holes in both ends. So for the parts A, I'm just working off the back tier. I'm measuring 4 inches down from the top of the back tier to the top of the board, installing the screw there, and then using the pre-drilled holes from our uprights to install it on the opposite end. And then the two parts B, I'm just going to place in between the parts A that we just installed. And now for the bottom tier. We're going to need 3 parts C with pocket holes on each end, and 1 part A with a pocket hole on one end. And on the inside, we'll install 2 of our parts B as nailer boards. They will be the same distance from the top as our previous nailer boards, so 3 1/4 inch. And this part A will be installed on the left side just like we did for the middle tier, sitting on top of the upright and attached 4 inches down from the top of the middle tier. And then we will close this frame off by installing our last part B, just like we did for the previous tier, 4 inches down from the top of the middle tier and flush with the upright. And here, I guess I'm just feeling a little froggy and wanted to prove a point at just how strong pocket hole screws are. Okay, so back to work. Okay, so what I'm doing now is installing support brackets I, and we'll be needing these a little bit later whenever we go to install our trim. So I'm measuring 3/4 of an inch up on my nailer boards, which will put them level with our outer rails. And our frame is done. So let's go ahead and get our wall boards ready. And for this, I'll just be using 5/8 by 72 inch fence pickets. So I'm going to start by cutting all of my wall boards to size, and while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and rip down my top trim as well as the bottom trim. So this will be the rest of our parts, J through S. So if you're still with me at this point in the video and you think that I have earned a subscribe, just hit this little box over here in the corner with my logo in it. I'll love you forever. And if you're building these to sell, the marketing techniques that we've discussed in previous videos will apply to this one. Staging and presentation will be key, even if you had to buy fake flowers. Did you notice in the opening that all of my flowers were fake? No, because you were focusing on the broad picture. And I've said it in many videos and I'll say it again. One of the main keys to marketing a product is helping the customer to visualize what it will look like. So with the rest of our parts cut, let's go ahead and start with wallboards J. And I will be using wood glue for this. So with the back of the planter facing towards me, the tallest tier, I'll install one board flush with our frame and then overlap the edge of that board with our second board. And we'll continue this on both sides until we're ready to drop down to our second tier. And in order to transition into our second tier, I'm just placing the board against the frame, tracing that out, and cutting it out with a jigsaw. Then you'll just repeat this process for the opposite side. Now we're ready for the wallboard for the middle tier, and these are going to be parts K. And we'll just install 2 of these on each side, then finish it off with a part N. And I put the dimensions for these smaller parts like N in the description, but just be on the safe side, I would just line it up with the edge and make a mark because the strip needed may be a little different than mine. What I've found with fence pickets is just because they say 5.5 inches wide, it can range anywhere from 5 1/4 to 5 1/2. So I've just installed part N, and now I'm going to install part L. And this one will be a little bit wider because we have to count for the overlay that we did with the first 2 boards. Now we can continue to use parts K to finish up this middle tier. And when we get to our bottom tier, we'll use the exact same method that we did previously to cut our notch. Now that we're on our bottom tier, we'll switch over to wallboards M, install 2 on both sides, and then we'll need 2 boards in to finish this off. And now we can move on to our 4-inch backboards, and this is where those nailer boards are going to come into play. Now I'm just going to start with the top tier with parts O. Now all of these wallboards are 4 inches, but whenever we get to the inside corners, we're going to have to trim them down a bit. And that trimmed down version will be part P. And then we'll repeat this process for the middle tier. But I've started on the inside this time, that way that I could have some overhang to make my mark. But if you would like all of your smaller parts in the center, again, these are parts P. Now with all of our wallboards in place, we can go ahead and start with our top tier's trim. These will be 4 parts Q cut on 45s. And to start with for this trim, I'm just going to glue and brad nail. I'll come back a little bit later and throw some screws in this. And then for the middle 2 tiers, we're going to be using parts Q and R. The Q trim will line up with our top tier, and the R trim will be on the sides. So I've already installed the trim on the left side. So for this right side, we're going to have to take a little notch off the end just so that it'll fit. And this is another one of those things that it's best to determine how much you need to take off once it's assembled. And then once everything is in place on the middle tier, we'll move on to the bottom tier. And all 4 of these trim parts will be parts R. And after cleaning this up a little bit, we're ready to install our screws and base trim. And while I'm doing this part that everyone loves to hate, the sanding, I just want to remind everyone to check out our Patreon community. The link will be in the description. But we just have a lot of fun, a lot of Q&A, getting to know each other. behind the scenes content and more business tips. I just thought that I would tell a little bit more about it because not only does it help to keep this channel going, but it also allows us all to connect on a little bit more of a personal level. But anyway, what you're seeing me do here is just kind of lay out my screw placement, and keep in mind there will not be a center support for 2 of these boards. You can add that in if you would like, but I really don't think that it's needed. I'm just going to pre-drill all of my holes and install 1.25 inch deck screws. Alright, so now with all of our screws in place, let's go ahead and finish this out with our base trim. Now keep in mind, for the base trim, we're going to be cutting our 45s with the trim on its edge. And the base trim will be labeled Part S. Now again, in a perfect world where everything is exactly the same size, all of those parts will match up perfectly. But we don't live in a perfect world, and we're not perfect carpenters. So I'd recommend cutting these parts to fit as well. And that is it. And it seems like that there are a lot of parts with this build, but once you make your first one of these and you see just how easy that it is, you won't even need instruction. Everything will just fall into place. You obviously want to build this, or you still wouldn't be watching. So go make it happen.